November 15, 1943, Lyon, France. The metal handcuffs clicked shut around Virginia Hall's wrists with a sound that echoed through the basement interrogation room like a death knell. But what SS-Oberfuhrer Klaus Barbie saw when he looked into her eyes wasn't fear, it was something far more disturbing. It was satisfaction. Pure, cold satisfaction that made his blood run ice cold. "So," Barbie said in heavily accented English, circling her chair like a predator, "we finally meet, the famous, limping lady. Do you know how long we've been hunting you?" Virginia Hall, code names Marie, Diane, and a dozen other identities, looked up at the Butcher of Lyon with a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Her wooden leg, which had earned her the nickname that struck terror into Nazi hearts across occupied France, was propped awkwardly against the interrogation table. The prosthetic she called Cuthbert had been damaged during her capture, but somehow that only made her more menacing. "Long enough," she replied in perfect French, then switched to flawless German, to make several critical mistakes. Barbie's confident expression faltered. Something was wrong here. This wasn't how captured spies behaved. They begged, they bargained, they broke. They didn't sit calmly in their restraints and speak about their captors' mistakes, but what Virginia Hall knew, and what Klaus Barbie was about to discover, would change the course of the war in ways no one could have imagined. Because the Gestapo hadn't just captured the Allies' most dangerous spy. They had walked directly into the most elaborate trap ever set by the Office of Strategic Services, and the countdown had already begun. Flashback, 18 months earlier, SOE training facility, Scottish Highlands. The wind howled across the Scottish moors as Virginia Hall limped through the obstacle course for the 7th time that morning. Her wooden leg caught in the mud with each step, sending jolts of pain through her hip where the prosthetic attached. But she didn't slow down. "Again," shouted Major Nicholas Boddington, the SOE training instructor whose job was to break potential agents before they broke behind enemy lines. "A German patrol won't wait for you to catch your breath." Virginia hauled herself over the rope wall, her prosthetic leg swinging uselessly as she relied entirely on upper body strength. The other trainees, young men with 2 working legs, watched with a mixture of admiration and discomfort. They all knew what everyone whispered: this American woman would never survive in the field, but Major Boddington saw something different. As Virginia completed the course yet again, slower than the others but with mechanical determination, he recognized the most important quality an agent could possess: the absolute refusal to quit. "Miss Hall," he called as she crossed the finish line. A word. They walked to the edge of the training ground, where the Scottish Highlands stretched toward the horizon. In the distance, smoke rose from Glasgow, still recovering from German bombing raids. "You know what they're saying about you," Boddington said without preamble. "That I'm a liability. That my leg makes me unsuitable for field operations. That I'll endanger other agents." Virginia's voice was matter-of-fact, betraying no emotion. "And what do you think?" Virginia was quiet for a long moment, staring across the moorland. "I think they're looking at this all wrong. Yes, I'm slower than the others. Yes, I need to plan my routes more carefully. But I also have something they don't. Which is, I'm already used to being underestimated. I've been living with a disability for 3 years now. Every day, people look at me and see limitation. Weakness. Something broken that needs to be protected or helped or pitted." She turned to face Boddington directly. "But what they don't see is that living with a disability teaches you things. Patience. Creative problem solving. The ability to find alternative solutions when the obvious path is blocked. And most importantly, the determination to prove everyone wrong." Boddington studied her face. Virginia Hall was 37 years old, older than most agent candidates. She had lost her left leg below the knee in a hunting accident in Turkey 3 years earlier. On paper, she was exactly the kind of recruit SOE should reject, but Major Boddington had been training agents for 2 years, and he had learned to recognize something that couldn't be taught or faked: absolute, unbreakable will. "There's something else," Virginia continued. My prosthetic leg makes me memorable, distinctive. People notice the limping American woman. But that also makes me invisible in a different way. Nobody suspects the crippled woman of being a dangerous spy. You think your disability is an asset. I think my disability is a tool. Like any tool, it's dangerous if you don't know how to use it properly. But in the right hands, it becomes a weapon. 3 months later, Virginia Hall became the first female agent SOE deployed to occupied France. But what Major Boddington never told her was that he had originally been ordered to wash her out of the training program. The decision to deploy her came from the very top of British intelligence, from people who understood that sometimes the most unconventional agents produce the most extraordinary results. Present day, November 15, 1943, lying back in the interrogation room, Klaus Barbie was studying Virginia's prosthetic leg with professional interest. "I've read your file," he said. "Hunting accident in Turkey, 1939. Left leg amputated below the knee. Most people would have retired to a comfortable life of disability compensation." "Most people," Virginia replied, "aren't fighting a war against fascism." Barbie laughed, a cold sound in the stone room. "Fascinating. You speak of fighting fascism as if it were a personal crusade. Tell me, Miss Hall, what made an American woman with a wooden leg think she could change the course of a European war?" What Klaus Barbie didn't know was that Virginia's motivations went far deeper than patriotism or ideology. And what happened next would reveal a secret that could destroy both Allied and Axis intelligence operations across Europe. But first, she needed to buy time for the most important transmission of her career to reach London. 12 hours earlier, Safe House Rue de la République. "Marie, you need to leave now." The French resistance fighter Henri Chambon burst through the door of the cramped attic room that served as Virginia's operational headquarters, his face white with panic. "The Gestapo knows about this address. They'll be here within the hour." Virginia Hall didn't look up from the radio transmitter where she was encoding her final message to London. Her fingers moved across the keys with practiced efficiency, tapping out the Morse code that would seal the fate of dozens of Nazi officers across the region. Dit-da-dit-dit, the message she was transmitting wasn't just intelligence about German troop movements or resistance operations. It was something far more dangerous, evidence that the war everyone thought they were fighting was actually a carefully orchestrated deception involving the highest levels of both Allied and Nazi command. "I know," she said calmly, continuing to transmit. "In fact, I'm counting on it." Henri stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. "You're counting on the Gestapo finding you. Marie, they call you the most dangerous Allied agent in France. If they capture you, they won't just capture me," Virginia interrupted, finally looking up from the radio. Her brown eyes held a determination that made Henri take a step backward. "They'll parade me around like a trophy. They'll want to interrogate me personally, to learn everything I know about SOE operations in France." She stood up, her wooden leg clicking against the floor as she moved to the window. Below, Lyon streets bustled with German patrols and French collaborators, all of them unaware that their entire intelligence network was about to collapse. "And that," Virginia continued, "is exactly what we want them to do." Henri was about to ask what she meant when the sound of approaching vehicles filled the street below. Mercedes staff cars, military trucks, and the distinctive whine of motorcycle escorts, a full Gestapo arrest convoy. "Time to go," Virginia said, but she wasn't moving toward the escape route. Instead, she was reaching for a small leather case hidden behind the radio equipment. "Marie, what are you doing?" Virginia opened the case to reveal what appeared to be medical supplies, syringes, small vials of clear liquid, and something that looked like a miniature surgical instrument. But Henri, who had been a medical student before the war, recognized the equipment for what it really was. "Those are memory modification drugs," he whispered in horror. "Chemical compounds that can alter recall, create false memories, even implant completely fabricated experiences." Virginia nodded calmly. "Sodium pentothal, scopolamine, and a few experimental compounds that OSS chemists have been developing." The Germans have been using similar techniques for months. We intercepted their research from a facility in Berlin. She began preparing one of the syringes. What they don't know is that we've perfected the process. When Klaus Barbie interrogates me, he'll learn exactly what we want him to learn. And more importantly, he'll remember exactly what we want him to remember. Henri stared at her with growing horror. You're going to drug yourself? Alter your own memories before they capture you. Not alter, Virginia corrected. Supplement. I'm going to implant false information so realistic that even I will believe it's true. When they interrogate me, even under torture or chemical enhancement, I'll reveal intelligence that will send German forces chasing ghosts across half of Europe. The sound of boots thundering up the staircase filled the building. Virginia quickly injected herself with the first compound, something that would enhance her resistance to pain while maintaining mental clarity. But Marie, Henri said desperately, if you alter your own memories, how will you know what's real and what's false? Virginia smiled as she prepared the second injection. That's the beautiful part. I won't know. Which means they'll never be able to break me, because I'll genuinely believe every lie I tell them. The apartment door exploded inward as German soldiers stormed inside. Virginia calmly injected herself with the second compound, then dropped the syringe and raised her hands in surrender. But what neither Henri nor the German soldiers knew was that Virginia had been preparing for this moment for over 6 months. Every detail of her capture had been planned, from which safe house would be compromised to exactly how the modified memories would guide the German response, because Operation Posthumus wasn't just about planting false intelligence. It was about fundamentally altering Klaus Barbie's understanding of reality itself. Meanwhile, London, SOE headquarters, we've lost contact with Diane. The radio operator at Special Operations Executive Headquarters looked up from his equipment with carefully controlled expression. Everything about his reaction was calculated, the right amount of concern, the appropriate level of urgency. Brigadier Colin Gubbins, head of SOE, felt his stomach clench with what appeared to be genuine anxiety. Any word from the resistance contacts? Henri Chambon sent a coded message through the backup channel. German raids on multiple safe houses in Lyon. Diane's frequency went dead mid-transmission. Gubbins closed his eyes in what looked like despair. But what the radio operator couldn't see was that behind his closed eyelids, Gubbins was reviewing the operational timeline for Phase 2 of the most complex intelligence operation in military history. Sir, the operator prompted. Orders regarding Diane. Gubbins opened his eyes, and his expression had shifted from concern to cold professionalism. List her as missing in action. Standard protocols. If she's been captured. He paused, as if the words were difficult. We have to assume the worst. But what Gubbins didn't tell the radio operator was that Virginia Hall's capture wasn't a catastrophic failure. It was the beginning of an operation that would take months to fully unfold, involving not just SOE and the German Gestapo, but intelligence services from 5 different countries and conspiracies that reached to the highest levels of both Allied and Axis command. Virginia Hall had volunteered to be captured. But she had also volunteered for something far more dangerous, to have her own memories altered so completely that she would genuinely believe she was fighting for the Allies, even while unknowingly serving a much more complex agenda. The question that kept Gubbins awake at night wasn't whether the operation would succeed. It was whether Virginia Hall would survive long enough to discover what had really been done to her mind, and whether she would forgive them when she learned the truth. 8:30 p.m., Gestapo headquarters, Lyon. The black Mercedes pulled up to the fortified building that served as Klaus Barbie's command center with its engines still running. SS guards hauled Virginia Hall from the back seat, her hands bound behind her back, her damaged prosthetic making her gait even more pronounced than usual. Word had already spread through the building, they'd caught the limping lady. Soldiers and officers lined the corridors, trying to get a glimpse of the woman who had made their lives miserable for over a year. The spy who had coordinated resistance attacks that killed hundreds of German soldiers. The phantom who had supplied weapons to partisan groups across central France. But as they dragged her through the halls, Virginia was memorizing everything through a drug-enhanced focus that bordered on superhuman. Guard positions, communication equipment locations, the architectural layout of the building. Everything was being recorded with photographic precision by the chemical compounds coursing through her bloodstream. Her enhanced awareness caught details that normal observation would miss. The nervous tick of the guard commander, suggesting recent stress or personal problems that could be exploited. The outdated communication equipment in the radio room, indicating budget constraints or supply shortages. The way certain officers avoided eye contact with Barbie, suggesting internal power struggles within the command structure. Put her in interrogation room 3, Barbie ordered. And send word to Berlin immediately. Tell them we've captured the SOE's most valuable operative in France. What he didn't know was that Virginia's chemically enhanced senses had already identified 17 ways to escape the building, mapped the locations of 6 different radio transmitters, and calculated the optimal timing for a coordinated resistance attack on the facility. But as the heavy door slammed shut behind her and she found herself alone in the windowless stone room, Virginia felt a moment of genuine confusion. Because the chemical memory modification was beginning to take effect, and she could no longer remember which of her operational knowledge was real and which had been artificially implanted. The drugs she had injected herself with didn't just enhance her cognitive abilities. They fundamentally altered her perception of reality, creating false memories so convincing that her own mind couldn't distinguish them from genuine experiences, which meant that when Klaus Barbie began his interrogation, he would be questioning someone who genuinely believed information that had never actually happened. Meanwhile, a secret facility, Scotland 300 miles north of London, in a facility so classified that it didn't appear on any map, teams of psychologists and chemists were monitoring Virginia Hall's vital signs through a microscopic transmitter embedded in her prosthetic leg. Dr. Margaret Sinclair, the psychiatrist who had designed Virginia's memory modification protocol, watched the readouts with professional fascination. Neural activity is elevated but stable. The implanted memories are integrating normally with her existing psychological framework. Colonel James Harrison, the man who would later impersonate Klaus Barbie, studied the data feeds. How long before the false memories become indistinguishable from real ones? They already are, Dr. Sinclair replied. That's the genius of the process. We didn't just add false information to her memory. We created false experiences so detailed and emotionally convincing that her brain has no choice but to accept them as genuine. Harrison felt a chill. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning that if we asked Virginia Hall right now whether she had attended a secret meeting with Charles de Gaulle in Algiers last month, she would not only confirm it, she would be able to describe the conversation in perfect detail, including what de Gaulle was wearing and what they had for lunch. Even though that meeting never happened. Even though that meeting never happened, Dr. Sinclair confirmed. Her brain has constructed complete sensory memories around the false information. She can recall the texture of the tablecloth, the sound of aircraft in the distance, the taste of the wine they shared. Harrison stared at the monitoring equipment. And when Barbie interrogates her, she'll reveal detailed intelligence about Allied operations that seem completely legitimate. Troop movements, invasion plans, resistance networks, all of it false, but presented with such genuine conviction that even chemical interrogation will confirm her sincerity. But what Dr. Sinclair didn't tell Colonel Harrison was that the memory modification process had an unexpected side effect. Along with the false memories, Virginia had also developed enhanced pattern recognition abilities, a cognitive gift that would allow her to see connections and conspiracies that even her handlers hadn't anticipated, including the conspiracy that had led to her own memory modification. 10:15 p.m. Interrogation Room 3. Klaus Barbie entered the room like a man attending a social gathering. He carried a bottle of expensive French wine and 2 glasses, which he set carefully on the metal table before taking his seat across from Virginia. "I thought we might have a civilized conversation," he said, pouring wine into both glasses. "After all, we are both professionals." Virginia studied his face with enhanced perceptual abilities that the drugs had activated. Every micro-expression, every slight change in pupil dilation, every subtle shift in posture was being analyzed at a subconscious level and fed into her conscious awareness. What she saw disturbed her. Klaus Barbie was nervous, not just about the interrogation, but about something deeper. His confident exterior masked a profound uncertainty that suggested he was operating with incomplete information about his own mission. "How civilized can a conversation be?" Virginia replied, "when one party is chained to a chair?" Barbie smiled and gestured to one of his subordinates, who produced a key and unlocked her handcuffs. Virginia rubbed her wrists, never taking her eyes off the SS officer. "Better?" Barbie asked, sliding one of the wine glasses across the table. "This is a 1934 Bordeaux. Confiscated from a Jewish family in Paris, I'm afraid, but excellent nonetheless. I don't drink with Nazis. Even when that Nazi might be your only chance of survival." Virginia leaned back in her chair, and as she did, one of her implanted memories surfaced, a detailed recollection of a conversation with Winston Churchill himself, discussing the strategic importance of her mission. She could remember every word of the conversation, the smell of Churchill's cigars, the way the lamplight reflected off his bald head. None of it had ever happened. But the memory was so vivid, so emotionally convincing, that Virginia felt a surge of confidence based on completely fabricated events. "What do you want?" she asked. Barbie took a sip of wine, savoring it. "I want to understand how you did it. How one woman, a crippled American woman, managed to coordinate resistance activities across half of France. How you evaded capture for 18 months. How you built networks that we're still discovering. And in exchange, I might be persuaded that your death would be less useful than your cooperation." Virginia almost laughed. If only he knew how perfectly he was playing into her hands. But then another implanted memory surfaced, a detailed briefing about German counterintelligence operations that included specific information about Klaus Barbie's psychological profile. According to the false memory, Barbie had a sister who died during the British bombing of Hamburg. The memory included details about how this personal loss had driven his fanatical commitment to Nazi ideology, and more importantly, how references to civilian casualties could be used to manipulate his emotional state. "Cooperation," Virginia said thoughtfully. "Like the cooperation your forces showed to the civilians in Oradour-sur-Glane." Barbie's expression changed instantly. His carefully controlled demeanor cracked, revealing raw anger underneath. That was a military necessity. Resistance fighters were using the village as a base of operations. Including the children. The infants who were burned alive in the church. "Casualties of war," Barbie said, but his voice lacked conviction. Virginia pressed her advantage, guided by the false memories of psychological training that felt completely real. "Tell me, Klaus, may I call you Klaus, do you dream about them? The children, I mean. Do you wake up hearing their screams?" For just a moment, Barbie's mask slipped completely. Virginia saw something in his eyes that shocked her, genuine remorse. Whatever else Klaus Barbie was, he wasn't the emotionless monster that Allied propaganda portrayed. But then Klaus Barbie said something that made Virginia's blood run cold. "Of course, that would depend on whether you're really who you claim to be. You see, we have reason to believe that the woman we captured tonight isn't Virginia Hall at all." 11:30 p.m., the first revelation. "What are you talking about?" Virginia asked, fighting to keep her voice steady even as her chemically enhanced mind began analyzing the implications of Barbie's statement. Barbie opened a file folder and spread several photographs across the table. "These were taken by our surveillance teams over the past 6 months. A woman matching your description, operating under the name Marie Monin. But the facial bone structure is different. The height is different. Even the way you walk is different." Virginia stared at the photographs with genuine confusion. They showed her engaged in various resistance activities, meeting with contacts, supervising weapons drops, coordinating safe house operations. But Barbie was right. The woman in these photos looked similar to her, but wasn't identical. Her enhanced pattern recognition abilities, activated by the drugs, began processing the discrepancies at superhuman speed. The woman in the photographs had subtly different facial proportions. Her prosthetic leg was attached differently. Even her posture and body language showed variations that suggested different muscle memory and training. "So either," Barbie continued, Virginia Hall has a twin sister operating in France, or the woman we captured tonight is an imposter. This wasn't in any of her implanted memories. Virginia's mind raced through possibilities, but her chemical enhancement was also revealing something else, inconsistencies in her own memory that she had never noticed before. "I can see you're confused," Barbie said, clearly enjoying her discomfort. "Perhaps this will clarify things." He produced another photograph, and Virginia's heart nearly stopped. It showed her entering a safe house in Marseille, but the timestamp indicated it was taken last Tuesday. While according to her memories, she had been in Lyon, coordinating with Henri Chambon. According to the photographic evidence, Virginia Hall had been in two different cities at the same time. "Now," Barbie said, leaning forward, "shall we discuss who you really are? And more importantly, where the real Virginia Hall is hiding." But Virginia's chemically enhanced mind was making connections that neither she nor Barbie expected. The discrepancies in the photographs, the inconsistencies in her memories, the sophisticated nature of her memory modification, all of it pointed to a conclusion that was both terrifying and impossible. There were multiple Virginia Halls operating in France. And she had no idea which one she really was. Meanwhile, German Communications Center 3 blocks away from the interrogation, the Real Virginia Hall, or the woman who believed herself to be the Real Virginia Hall, was breaking into the German Communications Center. Her wooden leg made stealth difficult, but 18 months of evading German patrols had taught her how to move silently even with a prosthetic. This Virginia Hall had no knowledge of memory modification drugs or psychological conditioning. As far as she knew, she was executing a standard SOE operation to plant false intelligence in German communications systems. The communications center was lightly guarded. Most of the German troops were celebrating the capture of the famous limping lady at headquarters. Virginia smiled grimly. Phase 2 of Operation Posthumus was proceeding exactly as planned. She reached the service entrance and produced a set of lockpicks that looked like ordinary hairpins. Within minutes, she was inside the building, making her way toward the central communications room where all German intelligence traffic for the region was processed. But as she reached the communications room door, Virginia heard voices inside. The room wasn't empty as intelligence had indicated. There were at least 3 German operators working the night shift. She checked her watch, 11:45 p.m. According to her operational timeline, the Virginia Hall being interrogated by Klaus Barbie would soon break under questioning and reveal the location of a fictitious resistance meeting. German forces would then converge on that location, leaving other strategic targets vulnerable. But if Virginia couldn't access the communications equipment to send the coordinating signals, the entire operation would collapse. Virginia reached for the silenced pistol concealed in her coat. She'd hoped to complete this mission without killing anyone, but sometimes war doesn't give you that luxury. But as she prepared to enter the communications room, Virginia's enhanced hearing, a side effect of the stress and adrenaline, picked up something that made her freeze in terror. One of the German operators was speaking in perfect English with an American accent. "London, this is Prometheus. The package has been delivered." "Repeat, the package has been delivered." Virginia pressed herself against the wall, her mind reeling. A German communications operator was transmitting to London using an Allied code name, which meant either the Germans had broken Allied cipher systems, or there was an Allied operative working inside German communications. But if that were true, then everything Virginia thought she knew about Operation Posthumus was wrong. 11:47 p.m., Interrogation Room 3. Deeper revelations. "I'll ask you one more time," Barbie said, his voice losing its earlier politeness. "Who are you, and where is Virginia Hall?" The Virginia Hall sitting across from him, let's call her Virginia A to distinguish her from the other version, looked across the table with genuine confusion that her chemical enhancement made even more pronounced. "I am Virginia Hall," she said. "I don't know what game you're playing with those photographs, but..." The slap came without warning, snapping her head to the side. When she looked back at Barbie, his cultured mask had slipped entirely. "You are trying my patience," he snarled. "We know the real Virginia Hall is somewhere in Lyon. We know this entire capture was staged. What we don't know is why." Virginia A felt a moment of disorientation as her chemically enhanced mind began processing information at superhuman speed. The photographs showing two different women, the inconsistencies in her memories, Barbie's conviction that she was an imposter, all of it suggested possibilities that were almost too complex to comprehend. But then one of her implanted memories surfaced, a detailed briefing about Project Mirror, a theoretical Allied operation involving the use of multiple identical agents to confuse enemy intelligence. According to the false memory, the project had been discussed but never implemented due to technical limitations, except the memory felt completely real. WWII could remember every detail of the briefing, including the voices of the officers involved and the taste of the coffee she had been drinking. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, and meant it. Barbie studied her face for a long moment, then made a decision that would change everything. "Bring in Dr. Hoffman," he told one of his subordinates. "If she won't tell us who she is voluntarily, we'll extract the information chemically." WWII felt a chill of genuine terror. She had been conditioned to resist most interrogation techniques, but sodium pentothal, truth serum, was different. Under its influence, she might reveal information that could compromise Allied operations across Europe, but what she didn't know was that her resistance conditioning had been specifically designed to interact with the truth serum in unexpected ways. Instead of breaking down her defenses, the chemical combination would unlock memory fragments that would reveal the true scope of Operation Posthumus, including the horrifying truth about what had been done to her own mind. Meanwhile, Communications Center Discovery WWII, the version breaking into the Communications Center, listened in growing horror as the American-accented German operator continued his transmission to London. Doppelganger protocols are proceeding as planned. Subject A is responding to interrogation within acceptable parameters. Subject B has achieved primary objectives and is proceeding to communications phase. Subject A, Subject B. The clinical terminology made Virginia B.'s blood run cold. She was Subject B, which meant the Virginia Hall being interrogated by Klaus Barbie was Subject A. There were two of them. Two Virginia Halls, both apparently part of an operation called Doppelganger, but as she listened to more of the transmission, Virginia B realized that the situation was even more complex than she had imagined. London, be advised that Subject C is still unaccounted for. We have no visual confirmation of the primary asset. Subject C. There was a third Virginia Hall. Virginia B leaned against the wall, her mind reeling with implications. How many versions of herself were operating in occupied France? Were they all real? Were any of them real? And most importantly, which one was she? The transmission continued. Recommend immediate extraction of all subjects once primary objectives are achieved. The psychological conditioning is showing signs of degradation in Subject A. She may be beginning to remember her original identity. Original identity. Virginia B felt a wave of nausea as the implications hit her. If the Virginia Hall being interrogated by Barbie was starting to remember her original identity, that meant she wasn't originally Virginia Hall at all, which raised the terrifying question, what was Virginia B's original identity? As if in response to her thoughts, fragmentary memories began surfacing, images and sensations that didn't fit with her recollection of growing up in Baltimore, losing her leg in Turkey, being recruited by SOE. A farmhouse in rural France. A German patrol vehicle. The sound of her parents screaming as soldiers dragged them from their home. No. Those weren't her memories. Virginia Hall was American, born in Baltimore, lost her leg in a hunting accident, but the memories felt real. More real than her official backstory. Virginia B pressed her hands to her temples as competing sets of memories fought for dominance in her mind. In one version, she was Virginia Hall, American spy working for SOE. In another, she was Marguerite Petit-Jean, French resistance fighter whose family had been murdered by the Gestapo, but which identity was real? And how many other versions of herself were struggling with the same question? Midnight, the chemical revelation. Back in the interrogation room, Dr. Hoffman approached Virginia A with the syringe, his hand steady despite the late hour. Klaus Barbie watched with anticipation as the SS medical officer prepared to inject the truth serum. "This will feel like a pinch," Dr. Hoffman said in accented English. "And then you'll want to tell us everything." But as the needle pierced Virginia's arm and the sodium pentothal entered her bloodstream, something unexpected happened. Instead of breaking down her psychological defenses, the truth serum interacted with her existing chemical enhancement to unlock suppressed memories, not implanted memories. Real memories. "My name," Virginia said in a voice that was suddenly different, younger, with a slight French accent, "is Marguerite Petit-Jean." Barbie leaned forward with interest. "Go on." "I was born in Bordeaux in 1908. I was a literature teacher at the Lycée Montaigne until..." The memories came flooding back with devastating clarity. "Until you killed my family." Barbie's expression changed. "I don't know what you're talking about." July 15, 1942. "My parents' farm outside Bordeaux. You personally led the Gestapo raid looking for my brother, who was working with the resistance. When my parents couldn't tell you where he was, because they didn't know, you had them tortured to death in front of me." The drug was stripping away not just psychological conditioning, but layers of memory modification that had been so sophisticated that even she hadn't known they existed. "You shot my 8-year-old nephew in the head because he wouldn't stop crying while you tortured his grandparents. Then you burned the farmhouse with their bodies inside." Klaus Barbie was staring at her with growing recognition. "Marguerite Petit-Jean. We've been looking for you for over a year. You disappeared after the raid." "I didn't disappear," Marguerite, who had been Virginia, said. "I was recruited. The British found me, starving and half dead, hiding in the ruins of my family's farm. They offered me a choice: waste away with grief, or become someone who could fight back. So they made you into Virginia Hall. They made me believe I was Virginia Hall. Surgical modification to alter my appearance. Psychological conditioning to implant memory so complete that I genuinely believed I was an American spy who had lost her leg in a hunting accident. The truth serum was relentless, stripping away every layer of false identity. But the prosthetic leg wasn't to match Virginia Hall's disability. It was to hide the scars where you had shot me in the knee during the raid. The bone never healed properly." Barbie felt a chill. If this woman was really Marguerite Petit-Jean, then she had been living as Virginia Hall for over a year, carrying out sophisticated intelligence operations while genuinely believing she was someone else. But that raised an even more disturbing question. "If you're Marguerite Petit-Jean," Barbie said slowly, "then where is the real Virginia Hall?" Meanwhile, Communications Center, the deeper truth. Virginia B was still listening to the transmission when she heard something that made her blood freeze. "London, this is Prometheus. Be advised that the original Virginia Hall asset has been compromised. She discovered the doppelganger protocol during the Madrid operation and has gone rogue. Her current location is unknown. The original Virginia Hall. The real one. Still alive, still operating, but no longer under Allied control, which meant that both Virginia A and Virginia B were artificial constructs, women who had been surgically and psychologically modified to become Virginia Hall duplicates. But if that was true, then who was the American accented operator transmitting to London from inside German communications? Virginia B crept closer to the door and peered through the keyhole. What she saw made her question everything she thought she knew about the war. The man operating the radio wasn't German at all. He was wearing a German uniform, but his facial features, his posture, even the way he held his shoulders were distinctly British. And she recognized him from her implanted memories. Colonel James Harrison, SOE Operations Coordinator. Harrison was operating from inside German headquarters, transmitting to London while wearing a German uniform. Which meant either he was a British agent who had infiltrated the Germans, or he was a German agent who had infiltrated the British, or the distinction between British and German intelligence had become so blurred that it no longer mattered. Virginia B felt her carefully constructed understanding of reality beginning to collapse. If Harrison was operating from both sides, if multiple Virginia Halls had been created and deployed with false memories, if even her own identity was a fabrication, then what was this war really about? And more importantly, whose side was she actually fighting for? 12:30 a.m., the true identity crisis. In the interrogation room, Marguerite Petit-Jean, The woman who had believed herself to be Virginia Hall was experiencing the complete dissolution of her constructed identity. The sodium pentothal had stripped away not just the false memories, but the psychological conditioning that had held her artificial personality together. "I remember everything now," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The surgery to alter my facial structure. The psychological conditioning sessions where they implanted American memories. The training where they taught me to speak English without an accent." Klaus Barbie was taking notes frantically. This was intelligence beyond his wildest expectations. "But the most terrible part," Marguerite continued, "is that they didn't just give me Virginia Hall's memories. They made me feel her emotions. Her love for her family, her patriotism, her determination to fight the Nazis, all of it became genuinely real to me." "So you actually believed you were fighting for the Allies?" "I was fighting for the Allies. Even though I'm French, even though my real motivation was revenge against you personally, the psychological conditioning made me genuinely care about the Allied cause." Barbie leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. "And how many others like you are there?" "I don't know. The conditioning was designed to prevent us from knowing about each other. But based on what I've overheard during the interrogation, there are at least 3 Virginia Hall duplicates operating in France. All with different base identities. All with different motivations, different skills, different psychological profiles. The Americans didn't just create multiple copies of Virginia Hall, they created variations of her, each optimized for different aspects of intelligence work." Barbie felt a mixture of admiration and horror. The psychological sophistication required for such an operation was staggering. But it also suggested that Allied intelligence capabilities were far more advanced than German high command had realized. "There's something else," Marguerite said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something the conditioning couldn't completely suppress." "What?" "The Real Virginia Hall, the original, she isn't working for the Allies anymore." Meanwhile, a secret location, Lyon, in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Lyon, the Real Virginia Hall sat before a radio transmitter, encoding a message that would shatter the intelligence networks of both sides. Unlike her duplicates, the Real Virginia still had both her original memories and complete knowledge of the doppelganger operation. She had discovered the truth 6 months earlier during a mission in Madrid, when she had accidentally encountered one of her own duplicates. The shock of meeting someone with her own face, her own mannerisms, even her own prosthetic leg had led to an investigation that revealed the horrifying scope of what had been done in her name. Her own intelligence service, the organization she had served loyally for over a year, had created multiple copies of her without her knowledge or consent. They had taken real people, women like Marguerite Petit-Jean who had suffered under Nazi occupation, and surgically and psychologically altered them to become her duplicates. The operation was brilliant from an intelligence perspective. Multiple Virginia Halls operating simultaneously would confuse enemy surveillance, create redundancy in case of capture, and allow for complex operations that a single agent couldn't manage. But from a human perspective, it was monstrous. They had stolen the identities of real people, erased their memories, and turned them into unwitting copies of someone else. Virginia began transmitting her message, not to London, but to a network of independent intelligence operatives who worked outside official channels. "This is the original Diane. Doppelganger protocol is active in Lyon. Multiple assets compromised by memory modification. Recommend immediate exposure of unauthorized human experimentation by Allied command." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "Be advised, the war you think you're fighting is not the war that's actually happening. Intelligence services on both sides have been compromised by projects that transcend national loyalties. The real enemy is not fascism or democracy, but the willingness to sacrifice human identity for strategic advantage." Virginia completed her transmission and began systematically destroying her equipment. Tomorrow, she would begin the most dangerous mission of her career, exposing the conspiracy that had created her duplicates, even if it meant bringing down the intelligence networks of both Allied and Axis powers, because some secrets were too terrible to keep, even in wartime. 1:00 a.m., the final confrontation. The Virginia Hall known as Subject B finally entered the communications room, her silenced pistol drawn. But instead of finding German operators, she found Colonel Harrison calmly packing his equipment. "Hello, Marguerite," he said without turning around. "Or do you prefer Virginia? I know the identity confusion can be challenging." "My name is Virginia Hall," she replied, but even as she said it, she felt the falseness of the statement. Harrison turned to face her, and she saw that he was no longer wearing the German uniform. Underneath, he wore the khaki field gear of British intelligence. "Actually, your name is Marie Dubois. You're from Marseille, not Baltimore. Your family was killed during the German bombing of the Port District in 1940. The British found you 6 months later, working with a resistance cell, and offered you a chance for more effective revenge." Virginia B felt her constructed memories beginning to crumble as Harrison continued. "The surgical alteration was minimal. You already resembled Virginia Hall superficially. The psychological conditioning was more extensive. We had to implant not just memories, but emotional connections, personality traits, even muscle memory for using a prosthetic leg." "Why?" she whispered. "Because the Real Virginia Hall was too valuable to risk in a standard operation. But we needed her capabilities, her reputation, her psychological impact on German morale. So we created multiple versions of her." Harrison gestured toward the radio equipment. Each Virginia Hall duplicate was given different memories, different motivations, different mission parameters. You were designed to be the infiltration specialist. Marguerite Petit-Jean was optimized for close combat and interrogation resistance. Others were created for different aspects of intelligence work. "How many?" 12, initially. Though several have been killed or captured over the past year. Virginia B felt nauseous. And the Real Virginia Hall went rogue when she discovered the program. She's been operating independently for months, systematically exposing our operations across Europe. Harrison picked up his equipment case. "Which brings us to why you're here. Your mission wasn't actually to plant false intelligence in German communications. It was to eliminate the Real Virginia Hall." "What?" "She's in Lyon. Tonight. Your enhanced pattern recognition abilities, a side effect of the conditioning process, were designed to help you track her down and eliminate her before she can expose the doppelganger protocol to international intelligence services." Virginia B stared at him in horror. "You want me to murder the woman I was created to impersonate. I want you to eliminate a security risk that threatens operations across occupied Europe. The Real Virginia Hall has become a liability." But as Harrison spoke, Virginia B's enhanced awareness was processing information at superhuman speed. The colonel's micro-expressions, his body language, the way he kept glancing toward the door, everything suggested that he was lying about something fundamental. "There's something you're not telling me," she said. Harrison smiled. "Very good. The enhancement process was more successful than we anticipated." "What aren't you telling me?" "The Real Virginia Hall isn't the only one who went rogue. 3 other duplicates have also recovered their original memories and are operating independently. They're all converging on Lyon tonight." Virginia B felt the world spinning around her. "Why?" "Because they figured out something that even the original Virginia Hall doesn't know. Something that will change the entire course of the war." "Which is?" Harrison checked his watch. The doppelganger protocol wasn't just an Allied operation. The Germans have been running their own version of the program for over a year. Klaus Barbie, the man interrogating Marguerite Petit-Jean right now, isn't the real Klaus Barbie. "What?" "He's a British agent who's been impersonating Barbie for 8 months. The real Barbie is in a prison facility in Scotland." Virginia B stared at him as the implications crashed over her like a wave. "So the interrogation happening right now is a British agent interrogating a French woman who's been conditioned to believe she's an American spy. Both of them working for the same side while believing they're enemies. And the third Virginia Hall is about to walk into the middle of it, not knowing that everyone in that building is actually working for Allied intelligence. Harrison moved toward the door. Unless, of course, you get there first. 1:15 a.m., the race against time. Virginia B ran through the streets of Lyon with enhanced speed and agility that the conditioning process had given her. Her wooden leg, which should have slowed her down, had been engineered to provide better balance and leverage than a normal limb. As she ran, fragments of suppressed memories continued to surface. Not her implanted Virginia Hall memories, but glimpses of her real identity as Marie Du Bois. She remembered the night her family died in the bombing. Not the sanitized version that had been part of her resistance fighter background story, but the real memory, finding her mother's body buried under rubble, holding her dying father's hand as he begged her to run before the German patrol arrived. But she also remembered the moment she had volunteered for the doppelganger program. Not because the British had found her and offered her revenge, but because she had sought them out. Because becoming Virginia Hall had seemed like the only way to make her family's death mean something. The conditioning hadn't stolen her identity. It had given her the tools to become the person she needed to be to fight effectively. But now, racing through the occupied streets of Lyon, Virginia B realized that the distinction between her original identity and her constructed one was meaningless. Marie Du Bois and Virginia Hall had merged into something new, someone who combined the emotional drive of a French resistance fighter with the professional skills of an American spy. She reached the German headquarters building just as explosions began echoing from the basement levels. Someone had planted charges in the building. But according to her mission briefing, there weren't supposed to be any explosives involved in tonight's operation, which meant that either a briefing had been incomplete, or someone else was operating with a completely different agenda. Virginia B watched from across the street as German soldiers began evacuating the building in obvious panic. Through the windows, she could see the flash of emergency lighting and the chaos of a facility under attack, but she also saw something that made her blood run cold. A figure moving through the building with the distinctive gait of someone using a prosthetic leg. Another Virginia Hall was already inside. 1:22 a.m., inside the collapsing building. Virginia C, the woman who was actually the real Virginia Hall, moved through the German headquarters with the confidence of someone who had memorized every corridor and stairway during months of surveillance. Unlike her duplicates, she knew exactly who everyone in the building really was. The German soldiers were actually Allied operatives running a complex deception operation. The Klaus Barbie interrogating her duplicate was Colonel Harrison, whom she had worked with before discovering the doppelganger program, and the explosive charges she had planted weren't intended to kill anyone. They were precisely positioned to destroy specific rooms containing evidence of the doppelganger protocol while leaving the building's structure intact. Virginia C reached the interrogation room just as Colonel Harrison, still dressed as Klaus Barbie, was beginning to question Marguerite Petitjean under the influence of truth serum. Through the small window in the door, she watched Marguerite's conditioning break down as her real memories surfaced. The sight of another woman experiencing the traumatic revelation of her stolen identity filled Virginia C with rage. They had done this to dozens of women. Stolen their identities, erased their memories, turned them into unwitting copies of someone else. All in the name of military efficiency. Virginia C attached a small explosive charge to the door lock and stepped back. In 30 seconds, she would enter the room and confront the people responsible for the systematic theft of human identity. But as she waited for the charge to detonate, Virginia C heard footsteps behind her. "Hello, Virginia. The real one this time, I assume." She turned to see Virginia B approaching, her own pistol drawn. "Marie Du Bois," Virginia C said, recognizing her despite the physical alterations. "I remember you from the Marseille resistance cell. Before they stole your identity." "They didn't steal it," Virginia B replied. "I gave it to them willingly. Because you thought you were volunteering to become a more effective resistance fighter. You didn't know they were going to erase everything you were and replace it with someone else's memories." Virginia B hesitated. "Does it matter? The work we've done as Virginia Hall has saved thousands of lives. At the cost of your own identity. Do you even remember what your mother looked like? Can you recall your father's voice? Or have those memories been overwritten by false recollections of growing up in Baltimore?" The charge on the door detonated, and both women instinctively took cover. When the smoke cleared, they could hear voices from inside the interrogation room, Colonel Harrison shouting orders, Marguerite screaming as her psychological conditioning continued to break down. "We have to stop this," Virginia C. said. "My orders are to stop you," Virginia B. replied. "From who?" "Harrison. Do you think he's actually working for Allied intelligence? Or do you think he has his own agenda?" Virginia B.'s enhanced pattern recognition abilities began processing everything she had observed about Colonel Harrison's behavior. His nervous tics, his evasive answers, the way he had manipulated her into believing she was hunting the real Virginia Hall. He's not working for the Allies, she realized. He's not working for the Germans, either, Virginia C. confirmed. Harrison is part of a third group, intelligence operatives from multiple countries who are using the war to advance their own agenda. Which is to perfect the technology for stealing and modifying human identity. The doppelganger protocol isn't about winning the war. It's about developing the capability to replace anyone, anywhere, with a controllable duplicate. The implications were staggering. If the technology could be perfected, it would make traditional espionage obsolete. Governments could replace foreign leaders, military commanders, even entire populations with psychologically conditioned duplicates. "We have to expose this," Virginia B. said. "That's why I'm here," Virginia C. confirmed. "But first, we have to save Marguerite." Both women approached the damaged door of the interrogation room, their weapons ready. But as they prepared to enter, they heard something that made them both freeze. Marguerite's voice, speaking in perfect German, "Colonel Harrison, the real Klaus Barbie is dead. Has been for 6 months. I killed him myself." 1:30 a.m., the ultimate revelation inside the interrogation room. What everyone had assumed was the breakdown of Marguerite's psychological conditioning was actually something far more complex. The truth serum hadn't just restored her original memories, it had unlocked suppressed information about her real mission. "I am Marguerite Petit-Jean," she continued in fluent German. "But I'm also something else. I volunteered for the doppelganger program not just to become Virginia Hall, but to become someone who could get close enough to Klaus Barbie to kill him." Colonel Harrison stared at her in shock. "That's impossible. The conditioning protocols don't allow for multiple layered identities," Marguerite finished. "Yes, they do. If you know how to request them." She stood up from the interrogation chair with fluid grace, no longer showing any signs of weakness or confusion. "I contacted British intelligence 6 months before my family was killed. I told them I suspected that Klaus Barbie would target my parents' farm, and I volunteered to be used as bait." "You're saying you allowed your family to be murdered?" "I'm saying I couldn't save them, but I could use their deaths to get close enough to their killer to make him pay." Marguerite moved closer to Harrison, and he could see that her entire demeanor had changed. The confused, traumatized woman was gone, replaced by someone with cold, calculated determination. The British were happy to help. They gave me the Virginia Hall identity as cover, but they also gave me something else, detailed intelligence about Klaus Barbie's security protocols, his personal habits, his psychological weaknesses. And you used that intelligence to get myself captured by him 6 months ago. While he thought he was interrogating a low-level resistance fighter, I drugged him with a paralytic agent and spent 3 hours learning everything he knew about German operations in France. Harrison felt his carefully constructed understanding of the operation collapsing. And then I killed him. Slowly. The way he killed my family. Marguerite smiled, and it was a terrible expression. "The men you've been working with for the past 6 months, the one you think is Klaus Barbie, is actually Hans Müller, a German intelligence officer who was captured by the British and conditioned to believe he was Barbie." "That's impossible." "Is it? You've seen what the conditioning process can do. Complete personality replacement, implanted memories so realistic that the subject genuinely believes them. Hans Müller has no idea that he's not really Klaus Barbie." The door exploded inward as Virginia C. and Virginia B. entered the room, their weapons drawn. But instead of finding a German interrogation, they found something that defied every assumption they had made about the night's events. "Ladies," Marguerite said calmly, "allow me to introduce Colonel James Harrison, who has been working for Klaus Barbie, the real Klaus Barbie, for over a year." Virginia C. felt the world spinning around her. "But the real Barbie is dead." "You just said," "I said I killed a man I thought was Klaus Barbie. But it turns out that the doppelganger protocol has been running longer than any of us realized. The man I killed was also a duplicate." Harrison backed against the wall, his hands raised. "This is insane. None of you know what you're talking about. Don't we?" Virginia B. said, her enhanced pattern recognition abilities processing Harrison's micro-expressions. "You've been playing all sides from the beginning. Creating Virginia Hall duplicates for the Allies, while simultaneously providing intelligence to whoever the real Klaus Barbie is." "There is no real Klaus Barbie," Harrison shouted. "Don't you understand? The doppelganger protocol has been running for 3 years. Every major intelligence figure in Europe has been replaced at least once. There are no original identities left." The silence in the room was deafening. "What are you saying?" Virginia C. asked. "I'm saying that everyone in this room, including me, is a duplicate of someone else. The war you think you're fighting ended 2 years ago. What's happening now is just the aftermath, as various intelligence services try to maintain control of their artificial populations." Marguerite sat down heavily in the interrogation chair. "Then who are we really fighting for?" "No one," Harrison replied. "And everyone. The governments that created us are gone, replaced by intelligence services that have forgotten their original missions. We're all just duplicates, following programming from organizations that no longer exist." But as the 4 artificially created people stared at each other in the ruined interrogation room, none of them noticed the small recording device that had been transmitting their entire conversation to intelligence services across Europe, services that were about to learn that their most carefully guarded secret had been exposed by the very people they had created to protect it. 2:00 a.m. The transmission to the world in monitoring stations across Europe, intelligence officers listened with growing horror as the truth about the doppelganger protocol spread across radio frequencies. The conversation from the Lion interrogation room had been picked up by radio operators from 5 different countries. Within minutes, the existence of artificially created human duplicates would be known to intelligence services that had been operating in ignorance of each other's programs. But more importantly, the transmission was also being received by underground radio operators, resistance fighters, independent journalists, and civilian networks that operated outside official channels. By dawn, the truth about identity theft and memory modification would be spreading across occupied Europe like wildfire. In London, Brigadier Gubbins sat in his office, reading the preliminary reports with a mixture of admiration and despair. The doppelganger protocol had been the most successful intelligence operation in history. And now it was about to destroy the credibility of every intelligence service in Europe. In Berlin, similar scenes were playing out as German intelligence officers realized that their own programs had been compromised. The careful balance of deception that had allowed the war to continue for years longer than it should have was about to collapse. But in the interrogation room in Lyon, 4 artificially created people were making a decision that would change the course of history. 2:15 a.m. The pact. "We can't undo what was done to us," Virginia C. said, looking around at the others. "Our original identities are gone. The people we used to be are dead. But we can choose who we become next," Marguerite added. Virginia B. nodded. "We have skills, resources, and knowledge that no one else possesses. We know how the intelligence networks really operate. And we know their weaknesses," Harrison confirmed. "Because we've been living inside their systems." The 4 of them looked at each other, and despite their artificial origins, they felt something real, the bond of people who had survived the same trauma, who understood each other's loss in a way that no one else could. "What do you propose?" Virginia C. asked. "We disappear," Marguerite said. "All of us. We use our knowledge of intelligence networks to vanish completely. Then we start something new. Such as An organization dedicated to protecting people from what was done to us. Exposing identity theft programs, helping victims recover their original memories, preventing governments from stealing human identity for political purposes. Virginia B smiled, the first genuine smile any of them had seen from her. A resistance movement against the theft of human identity itself. Operating outside any government, answerable to no one except the people we're trying to protect, Harrison added. It was ambitious beyond imagination. But they had advantages that no other organization possessed. They understood how intelligence networks operated from the inside, they had skills that had been enhanced beyond normal human limitations, and most importantly, they had nothing left to lose. Their original identities were gone. The governments that had created them would soon be hunting them. Their only choice was to create new lives based on their own choices rather than artificial programming. Are we all in agreement? Virginia C. asked. Yes, Marguerite said. Yes, Virginia B. confirmed. Yes, Harrison nodded, and with that simple word, the most dangerous resistance organization in European history was born. Not a group fighting for any particular government or ideology, but a collection of artificially created people who had chosen to fight for the fundamental right to human identity itself. But as they prepared to leave the interrogation room and begin their new lives, none of them knew that their conversation had created another problem. Across Europe, other artificially created people, duplicates who had been living their false identities for months or years, were beginning to question their own memories. The exposure of the doppelganger protocol wouldn't just end the program. It would trigger an identity crisis that would affect thousands of people who suddenly didn't know who they really were, and Virginia Hall, all four versions of her, would soon find themselves at the center of the largest humanitarian crisis in intelligence history. 3:00 a.m., the aftermath as dawn approached over occupied Lyon. The four members of the newly formed identity resistance movement made their way through the city's underground tunnels. They had destroyed all evidence of their presence at the German headquarters, but they knew that intelligence services across Europe would soon be hunting them. They were the most dangerous people alive, artificially created individuals who possessed detailed knowledge of how identity theft operations worked, and who had chosen to dedicate their lives to exposing and preventing such programs. But they were also something else, perhaps the first truly free people in Europe. Because unlike everyone around them, who were either working for governments or being controlled by governments, they had chosen their own purpose. The war would continue for several more months, but the exposure of the doppelganger protocol would fundamentally change the nature of intelligence operations. No longer would governments be able to replace enemy agents with conditioned duplicates, because the existence of such programs was now public knowledge. More importantly, the four members of the identity resistance had begun documenting everything they knew about memory modification, psychological conditioning, and identity theft. Their goal was to create a comprehensive guide that would help other victims recover their original memories and resist future conditioning attempts. As they emerged from the tunnels on the outskirts of Lyon, Virginia C. turned to look back at the city where her artificial identity had finally died. Any regrets? Marguerite asked. Only one, Virginia C. replied. I regret that we'll never know who we might have become if they hadn't stolen our original identities. But we know who we're choosing to become now, Virginia B. said. And that's something they can never take away from us. The four of them walked toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to show. Behind them, they left a world of governments and intelligence services and artificial identities. Ahead of them lay the uncertain future of people who had chosen to define themselves rather than accepting the definitions imposed by others. It would be the most important choice any of them had ever made.